Hi there, gang, and welcome to episode 13 of the SDR DiscoCall podcast. I'm your host, Neil Bouyan. Today's guest is Ezana Haddis, an SDR from Mintago, originally from Dubai, went to Edinburgh Uni to become a brand ambassador for Tinder and Bacardi, tips and tricks for networking and introducing yourself to new people, the life of an intern and learning the point of processes, but also how he keeps up to date through social selling and tips and tricks for cadences. So how does the SDR DiscoCall podcast work? Well, it's actually a discovery call, hence the name. And every Tuesday at 8 a.m, we're going to have a brand new SDR for 30 minutes and an agenda of introductions, their SDR story, and 3 key takeaways that they've learned to share with other SDRs. So with that in mind, let's begin. So guys, I want to introduce a really bubbly, extroverted character that I had the pleasure of meeting in the last few weeks. Today's guest is Ezana Haddis, who is an SDR from Mintago, or Mintago, depending on how you want to say it. And we connected on LinkedIn. I was introduced to him by a really good friend, Will Koning. So Will, if you're listening to this, thank you so much for the introduction. Ezana, how are you doing today, sir?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Neil. Happy to be here and definitely excited to have some chats.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being a guest on the SDR DiscoCall podcast. So, Ezana, I was checking out your LinkedIn before we connected. I saw that you had some experience working with Tinder. You traveled the world and worked out in Dubai as an intern. You were head of sales at an agency, and then you came to Mintago, or Mintago, however you want to say it. Kind of tell us your story. What were you? Who are you? And currently, what are you doing? And tell us a little bit about yourself, Ezana.
Sure. Yeah, great. So I am currently working at Mintago or Mintago, however you want to say it. But yeah, I'm working at Mintago right now. I help employers, create a financially healthier, happier workforce. And it's something that I kind of just fell into. You mentioned some of my previous sort of work experience and roles. And it almost all of them were a product of just who I am, I'd say. Mainly because when I was in uni and I was a campus ambassador for Tinder, I saw that job posting and I was like, this is hilarious, right? I mean, who doesn't want to say that they worked for Tinder at some point?
Yeah.
So I did it, and it was quite ambassador roles are quite networky, right? It's all about making connections, promoting the brand on campus, kind of helping build that brand awareness. Not that Tinder really needed that, but they just kind of wanted to create some more hype, right? And that's literally what we do. We'd give out merch, host events, kind of just get people together. So it was very, I've always sort of been that kind of person that likes to, throw events and kind of network and meet different people, just because I like meeting different people, right? Everyone has a story. I grew up in Dubai, and Dubai is a melting pot of cultures. So I always had a lot of friends from different places, and I always wanted to know, how they got to where they were and kind of why they were where they were at, and that naturally leads itself to being kind of like a people person, right? Because now when I go to uni, all of a sudden there's a lot of different people. It's very international. I went to Edinburgh, and then all of a sudden the same thing happens again, and you're just kind of meeting people all the time. Like, oh wow, that last name, I don't recognize it. Where are you from? What do you do? What do you like to do? Do you want to come to this Tinder event? So yeah, I would say, I would say that if we're talking about my story, I did grow up in Dubai, and I think that molded me as a person a lot in terms of its internationalness and sort of everything. No one can ever place my accent. People are always like, where are you from?
I'll be honest, like when we first connected, I heard certain twangs and I was thinking to myself, where is this guy from? And I didn't have the courage to kind of ask it out, but to hear that story of Dubai, and I can get it. I've got a few friends that have come from Dubai and like work out in Dubai as well.
Yeah.
But no, that's cool. So you've come from Dubai, you went out to Edinburgh Uni to study, and you came across Tinder, and it's with its networking.
Yeah.
Like, what were your friends saying when you said, I'm a brand ambassador for Tinder? How did they take that?
They found it hilarious. They did find it hilarious. The thing is, I already had done a few previous ambassador roles before Tinder, right? So I'd done Bacardi, and I mean, as a second year student, being a brand ambassador for Bacardi is just a great, it's a great in with everything, right? Because I get to know all of the sort of like club owners through the events that we host. You get a limitless amount of rum. It was a very ideal job, and it was a lot of fun. And then after that, I just thought, why don't I keep doing this? Because this is fun. It's a job that I can have that's not too taxing. That's kind of brings in a bit of money, but at the same time is a lot of fun and introduces me to a lot of really cool people. So why not do it? And I looked for other roles that were similar. The company that I'd worked with for Bacardi was through this sort of youth marketing agency. They put me up for the Tinder role as well, and it was great. I mean, it got to the point where actually I'd been requested to be an ambassador for Echo Falls as well, and that was hilarious. Because they basically just seen all of the kind of Echo Falls groups that we'd created in Edinburgh, and they'd been like, "Oh wow, you guys are doing this great marketing stuff for us, basically for free. So why don't you come get paid for it?" I was like, "Yeah, sure. Like I'm 100% down. Let's do it."
I can only imagine. So like you're like you say, you're in Edinburgh uni. You are the party man because, well, on one side of it, if you want to know about clubs and places to go and you want a decent drink, then obviously you can go towards that brand and be hooked up. And yeah, if you're looking to date or meet new people, then there's this great platform to like introduce. You are like the guy to go meet at uni. That is amazing. So and what when you were like networking and learning to connect with people, what are the things like that stood out to you? Like that, like you said to me in our original discussion, you're somebody who's outgoing, you're extroverted, you like networking. What is it about networking that excites you, Ezana?
I honestly think it's more to do with I just like meeting great people, right? And it's always it's always nice to meet new people, right? And in terms of like the way I grew up and kind of like the whole multicultural stuff, it's always great to meet people from different walks of life and just kind of understand their story and have a chat and even trade stories. Really, I find that energizing to myself. It's something that brings me joy and also like keeps me kind of and ask any of my friends, and that's probably what they'll tell you. They'll be like, "Oh, Ezana, he's just talk to a tree." But yeah, I think that it's just nice to sort of keep in contact with people, especially now with the whole kind of social distancing thing and all the online events and stuff that's been happening. It's just nice to meet new people outside of your flatmates.
And I think that's a really good key bit. So you obviously get your energy from people, talking to people, meeting with people, and especially in kind of the situation that we're in, it's really good to connect with people. And I know with a lot of SDRs that I do speak to, it's that making that initial breaking the ice, having the conversation with somebody, the amount of fears that are in the pit of their stomach to have a conversation with somebody. What kind of tips would you give them to kind of like break that nervousness?
I would say, honestly, just go for it, right? Like most people are nice and they're not gonna, sort of shut you down for no good reason, right? If you're going in there with, with just like the intention to kind of say hello, no one's gonna say like, "Oh, I don't want to speak to you," right? Most of the time, people will just be like, "Oh, hi, yeah, my name is Neil. Nice to meet you. How are you doing today? Yeah, it's great." And then you just have a little chat, and that's it. I would say, especially at events and stuff like that. Obviously now they're online, so the format is different, right? You have like breakout rooms and all these sort of things. But previously you could just some people feel kind of shy about walking into groups. But I'd just say just go for it. Just go for it and say, "Hey, what's up? My name is Ezana, and what are you guys talking about? I'd like to join this conversation. How are you doing? I'm from Dubai. What's up? How about you? Where are you from? Great. Oh, wow. I actually have a friend from there." And then, the conversation just flows naturally once it's started. I would say just don't think about it too much. Don't get in your head. At the end of the day, people are just people. No one's, out here trying to be, a terrible person for no reason. No one's going to chew you up for saying hi. People are decent human beings.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think you're right. Like, just put yourself out there. And I think the more you just keep doing that, the more it will become natural, and the more you'll become comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And I always say to like students, like, what's the worst that can happen? They go like, all right, thanks, not interested, or yeah, hi, see you later. That's the worst. Or an awkward silence of, okay, I'm going to kind of walk away from this conversation. That's the worst thing that can happen to you, right? But kind of coming back to you, like, I remember when we were speaking in our meeting a few weeks back, you said, so you're creating like a brand on campus, and you want a type of role which is dynamic and fast paced, and you like things which are targeted. Kind of what happened after university and like when you was going into like work and paid work, etc.
Yeah, so I've always looked for roles that allow me a certain degree of flexibility. I do like, I do like sort of working on my own, but I do also like collaborating, right? But a lot of sales is quite individual in a similar way to how the brand ambassador roles were. Yeah, I would have a partner or whatever, but at the end of the day, we came up with our own strategies. We collaborated a little bit on them, and then we tried to like deploy the events together. And I'd say in a lot of roles, it's quite similar when in relation to sales, right? Because at the end of the day, you're creating your own sort of templates, your emails, your scripts, your videos, your approach, right? You craft the whole thing yourself, but at the same time, you collaborate with your team, with your group, with marketing, etc., to try and position the company in the best way possible. So I guess for me, I've always kind of been drawn to those sort of roles, which is why I enjoyed being a brand ambassador. And then when I did ops in Dubai for a while, right? That was an interesting role because basically the head of service at the time had just come in. He was new, and he'd gotten these interns on board to sort of sort a few things out. So I come on board and I'm sat in a room with the head of service and operations, his like top manager, and then the head of project management, right? So it's like a boiler room. I've got all these, I've got all of the top guys like that. There's like the bullpens. I'm not in the bullpens. I'm in the offices, right? So I would have been safer probably in the bullpens as an intern, kind of like dragging my feet or whatever. But I was right in the heart of it. So that just motivated me even more. And I ended up doing a lot more tasks than I was actually assigned because I was just eating through work, right? Because it was kind of individual work. So I was just kind of getting through it real quick. Head of service would be away for a couple of weeks, come back, and I'd be like, oh, I finished everything you gave me, plus like this and this and this, because I thought it might be helpful. And you'd be like, well, okay, great. And let's move forward from that. But while it was a really great job, and it was really interesting to kind of be in that kind of service ops role and kind of helping with the like the background kind of logistics of the company, making sure the contracts were right, talking to sales and legal to make sure everything was sort of in order. Even though that was really cool, helping with the process. And that's what he was all about. He was about process, make sure the process is right. And I think that learning of process really transferred very well to when I went into sales for the first time, right? Because, operations is inherently not people facing, right? It's all about the business. It's all about how can we be as efficient as possible? Are the contracts that we have as efficient as possible? How many spare parts you're sending, et cetera, et cetera. I knew that, I'd like to do a similar thing in how I work, but I want it to be client facing. People do energize me. I want to be, on the front lines, not sort of in the back seat, as it were. So so when I was still doing my master's, so this is even pre sort of work when I was in my master's, a friend of mine set up a marketing startup, and that's what I was head of sales for, just to help really head of sales in all but name. I was still sort of studying full time. I have a bad habit of having little startups left and right, even when I'm in uni. But you can always make it work.
Kind of like a side hustle, right? You're always doing like a side hustle.
Yeah. I always have kind of some side hustles going on. One of my friends sort of had this idea for this retail tech startup in our fourth year, and I ended up doing that with him for about 12, 13 months. It didn't work out in the end, but it was a journey for sure. I mean, I was actually doing that ops internship at the same time as we were launching the website. So I would literally wake up at like 7 in the morning, get to my internship, work until like 5, 6 o'clock, come back home, do another like 5 hours on the startup, 5, 6 hours, and then sleep at like midnight, and just like another day, right? My whole summer was just a grind that summer.
So if we pause there for I really want to pick apart this bit. So
sure.
If I get it right, you're being an intern, you're working this one job where it's about operations and you're trying to streamline processes because you're an intern, you're learning. You got this boss that may go off for a couple of days or weeks, whatever. He would give you like a task list to do. You'd smash through all of this, but then do other things on top of that to help them out, improve their stuff. And they were like, yeah, cool. But then in parallel, you're also finishing that job and then going to work with a friend who's at uni to kind of build up this startup and doing a couple of hours to launch a website on that. Is that right?
Yeah. I know. I mean, when you say it like that, it just sounds a little mad. But with the ops thing, the reason was my main sort of task was to build a dashboard of all the service contracts, right? But while I was doing that, obviously, I would go through all the details of the contracts. So I started noticing little things like the fact that we're sending too many spare parts to one location, right? And then we were losing like 17% on it or something like that. So I'd keep sort of bringing those things up to him and creating sort of spreadsheets and stuff to explain them. And he'd be like, man, you're doing this dashboard, but you keep looking at the money. and I'm like, but the money, you know what I mean? We're losing some money here. We need to renegotiate this contract. And he'd be like, okay, great. Yeah, let's do that. Go to legal, sort it out. Yeah, so that was it was a lot. It was a lot that summer, to be fair.
I can imagine. Well, if anything, like, well done and hats off. I think that's quite an entrepreneurial spirit and something that really can transfer into startups when you go to join tech companies, etc. Because this is what they're trying to figure out. They may have a process which works fine today, but if an individual can do that process and then kind of see if there's any bottlenecks and then bring that to the attention to improve things, you can be a 100% star asset to that company. And I think a really good piece here, advice that I give to SDRs, when I used to be a manager, like an SDR manager, I'd said, like, come to me with problems, but also come to me with solutions as well. And they used to say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're stuck with a prospect on an email, I'd ask, how would you do it? Like, how would you overcome that? Or if you have an objection on the phone, kind of like, okay, what was the objection? Why do you think that person felt that way? And give me 3 examples of how we could turn this around. So for any listeners out there, if you've got an SDR manager or, perhaps you're going through problems, I always say try to think of 3 solutions, or just ask yourself the question 3 times of how can I do this? How can I do this? What can I do to improve? So I really love to hear that from you, that, you came to him with solutions as well of how to improve it.
Yeah.
So you're doing the intern thing. You're also like helping out your friend. Like you said, it wasn't successful, but it was something, a lesson learned.
Yeah.
Kind of what happened after this period, Ezana? Like, what did you then go into next?
Yeah, sure. So that this period sort of finished off, and then that's when I sort of joined Mintago. I joined as an intern in my final year. It was sort of part of my degree course that I had to do an internship. So I joined Mintago. Actually, Will, who you mentioned at the start, was my head of sales and mentor at the time. He was at SAS Leeds doing his thing, and he's a crazy sales trainer, right? Emphasis on the crazy. But yeah, no, crazy good for sure. So I got to get a really great running start in sales, which I'm super thankful for, because basically when I came on board, I kind of knew some of the basics, etc. But anything to do with sort of sales engagement software, cadences, etc. Like I was completely out of my depth, right? And
And when you say out of your depth, what do you mean? Was this completely brand new to you, or kind of what do you mean by out of your
yeah, I
depth?
mean, I'd never sort of used any of those sales engagement softwares before, right? It wasn't any of the startups that I'd worked for before were really like, kind of like the typical sort of garage startup. We used, Wix to create our website for the first kind of MVP. It would be a lot of like on the ground marketing and promoting and stuff like that. And for that retail tech startup, our soft launch was meant to be in Edinburgh, right? So we're just getting a bunch of people on our Instagram and stuff, trying to build up that audience within the city, so that when we did our soft launch, we could test that out properly, right?
Yeah.
So it was a completely new experience to come into a startup of a completely different caliber, right? Because it's VC backed. It's kind of it's got a leadership team that's super successful and has created previous successful startups, right? So this is sort of like the big leagues, right? And Will is also just a crazy sales trainer, right? So he expects sort of the best from you at all times, and quite high expectations in terms of delivery and output, and making sure that we're closing those deals and or booking those demos. So I come in and it's a whirlwind, right? It's a complete whirlwind. He's got all this training material and this whole program that he is testing out, right? Before his whole academy thing. So he's got this whole thing, and he's like, I'm going to test it on you, right?
So you're the guinea pig.
I'm the guinea
like
pig. I was
Okay.
I was patient zero. So
Yeah.
so it's so it was basically at the start of quarantine. I was basically at the start of quarantine, so I'm back home, back in Dubai. I'm with my family. My mom kind of called me and she's like, you got to leave London. you got to come back. I was like, all right, cool. I go back. So now I'm on a slightly different time schedule, right? So it's 12 o'clock. Sort of what time? 12 o'clock is 9 a.m. here, 3 hours ahead. At the time.
Okay.
So I'd be kind of waltzing into these morning meetings at 12 o'clock my time, 9 a.m. UK, and then I would work until 8 p.m. In Dubai, right? But what would actually happen is, because Will would give me so much work and so many sort of tasks and like things to digest and videos and LinkedIn, etc. I ended up just having a lot of training in the mornings. So I'd wake up at like 7 in the morning, like go for a run, have some breakfast, and then I would sit down and basically just go through a bunch of the training for like 3-4 hours. So I'd have really long days, right? Because for basically like 2.5 months, all I did was train, work, train, work, train, work, train, work. And I had so much market. I mean, I have a sales playbook that's like 130 pages long, right? Just from all the little bits of like, prospecting videos, any sort of like LinkedIn stuff. Josh Braun is a great sales trainer that we use as well. And just really just getting me integrated in that network, understanding like who the salespeople are, kind of who, where the resources are in terms of like videos on prospecting or new techniques or new best practices, who the sort of personalities are to kind of follow, right? And I would, in the early days, I'd just kind of go on LinkedIn and just shoot people requests, right? Like I'd watch a podcast and I'd send in a request over saying, hey, I saw you were on, so and so's podcast. Could I'd really love to connect and maybe share some tips at some times, etc. And the thing is, and this is coming back to how do you speak to people in a group, or how do you connect with people randomly, right? Because you'd think that these people would not listen to me or accept me at all, right? Like, who am I? I'm like some starter SDR in London, and this is some VP of sales of like whatever in the US, right? You think that the guy's not even gonna look twice. But I've got so many connection requests and like acceptances from all these like great sales trainers, great sales personalities, and VPs of sales across the US and the UK, right? And it's great because now I've got this network that I can sort of ask questions to every now and then. have a chat with, and they're all so nice and so courteous, and will always sort of be happy to help out. And that's, so I'd recommend for anyone to just sort of, make sure that they're always kind of growing that and learning, because you've got to keep learning with sales. You just got to keep learning. Every day there's something new that you can try,
Yeah. Totally agree. Like, I think the original hashtag that everybody says from like the boiler room days, etc., is like always be closing, but mine is just hashtag always be learning, because you want to be learning from your network. And I think that's the beauty of LinkedIn, because it's kind of like the YouTube was for video. So we can watch YouTube for hours. There's so many tutorials, there's so many videos and stuff to help with your learning. And I think with LinkedIn, it is like the biggest sales playbook available online for free, where you can consume all of this content. But I really love that journey as well. So if I get it right, like Will takes you on as this guinea pig. He goes through like his exciting sales training with you, where you're waking up in the morning, you're going for your jog, have some breakfast, consuming hours, if not, of content. And then by your lunchtime, Will's kind of waking up to begin his day. And then there's like a shed load of tasks to complete. And this is continuously going on. And this is part of your, like I would say, correct me if I'm wrong, like your internship. This was your internship with Will, right?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah, this is part of my internship. I mean, first of all, Will is always up like super early in the morning. So even though I'd be up at, whatever is my time, right? Like at 10 o'clock, so 7 o'clock for him, he'd probably be up saying like, "Hey, are you up? Are you awake? Like, I need to send you some stuff, or have you done this? Or like, here's a new strategy that I just thought of. We should try this."
Yeah.
And like we're changing everything. There was one day, it was me and our AE Ollie, and we'd been trying a certain tactic. We've been using sort of the 10-80-10 rule for a little bit, and then we got on Flip the Script by Beck Holland, right? And Will was like, change everything on everything, all our emails, like all our outreach. It was like a day, and it was like a reset day. Like he was like, all right, we're changing everything. This is the new thing. And then we did, and our engagement soared, right? Like we were doing a lot better. We went to open rates that shot through the roof, reply rates shot through the roof. I had 130 replies of cold emails in July.
Wow.
Right? Which was just like,
that's nice.
Mad. Yeah. So it was, it was pretty good. And I think that's the kind of like dynamic change that now I'm used to, so that I'm constantly sort of checking if what I'm doing is working, and cutting it, kind of building, cutting it, rebuilding, cutting it, rebuilding, repositioning. And I guess that's also one of the benefits of working with a young startup, right? Because you're constantly sort of like deciding where you fit sort of in the whole market.
I agree, because it kind of I love that. So you have the ability to adapt and change given the current circumstances. And I know during like the lockdown period, so many people are constantly having to adapt, and that's kind of like what Will was saying, like in our show a few weeks back, where he's saying like there are sales books out there which can kind of give you plays that maybe worked 10 years ago, but it's what we both love is SDRs such as yourself. You're in the trenches, you have to constantly adapt and change to see what's working now. So for instance, he was talking about Aaron Baker from Clean. Like the guy booked a whole ton of meetings, and he just wanted to get him on board to kind of understand like, what are you doing? And that's kind of like why I want to do this podcast as well, because I want to hear what are SDRs doing, what are they facing, so that they can share this insight with other SDRs to learn. But I think it does take a certain amount of mental capacity to deal with that, because your story, as you're saying there, just kind of reminded me when I was an SDR working for a tech startup, Zora. And I remember in the period of 2 years, I had 8 different SDR managers, because the original one left, and then we had somebody else to kind of fill the gap. And we went through 8 different people where the comp plan changed, the messaging changed, the way that the personas that we were going after, the target accounts, account executives were constantly either coming through the door and out the door, because as a startup, it is quite volatile in the early days when you're doing it. I remember I just used to sit there with my team when I was the SDR manager as well, and just having to like kind of repeat back kind of, okay, team, here's a new strategy. This is what we're going for. And I used to see a lot of people get disheartened because they were trying something, they felt they were going to be successful in that new approach, and then all of a sudden, hey, ship is changing direction. We need to kind of like hustle and move along with that.
Yeah.
So my ask of you is somebody that's gone through a lot of change and having to adapt. What tips would you give out to SDRs that may be facing the same thing as Anna?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Um, I would say that one of the things, and definitely a mistake that I made, was that you want to make sure that you keep backing your winners even while you change them, right? And I think, for example, if you've got a cadence or a type of messaging that's working, even if it's not working as well as you'd like it to work, um, then when you're making changes, don't just completely leave it out, right? You want to do at least the basics sort of with that, with what's already working while you're working on the new things, while you're sort of split testing or etc., or even creating completely new cadences and new sort of approaches. You kind of want to keep backing your winners as well, because the worst case scenario could be that you now stop using the one that's semi-effective or kind of effective, and then you start using a completely new one that you think is going to be more effective, but it actually turns out to be less effective or not effective at all, right? And now you've gotten yourself in a position where everything that you're doing is not working, and the stuff that was working you haven't been using, and so you haven't added any new leads, so there's no sort of like backlog, that pipeline is dry. You know what I mean? So I would say, always, when you're split testing, when you're kind of bringing out new approaches, don't stop doing the old thing, even if you're doing it in a reduced sort of capacity. You want to have that kind of safety net, right? So that'll act as your safety net to experiment and ensure that you're still sort of meeting your targets. Um, and then you can filter out the other stuff. You can test it, and fail fast. Honestly, is another thing I'd say. Fail fast. Instead of testing something for a super long time, test it for a shorter time, but with a lot of variation. Maybe you want to test out like an email and see how good it is, instead of sending like 20 a day for 2 weeks. Maybe just send 60 a day at different times for like 4 days, right? So send some at 20 schedule for the morning, for the afternoon, for the lunchtime, etc. Mix it around, and then you've got a pretty good understanding of how well that email is going to do as a first touch, at least.
I think that's some solid advice, dude, because like I've worked with teams or with SDRs when they're using things like SalesLoft or Outreach or Mixmac, like sales engagement tools, and they build out a cadence. So for anybody that's not familiar with what a cadence is or a sequence, it's a series of steps of emails, calls, or perhaps social touches. And they initially I've seen it a lot. The first emails is always requesting that meeting. And I always advise, don't try to use an email to just book a meeting. Use it to open up a dialogue, start a conversation with somebody, see if there's an interest, you know? But they build out this cadence, which may have, I don't know, 9 steps over 11 days, etc. And because that first email, that touch isn't working or hasn't worked the way they'd wanted it to, they want to kind of change it, edit it straight away. But I always try to give the advice of give it a little bit of a run rate, give it a couple of weeks, send out X amount of emails to kind of get a good data point, and then measure kind of what's working. And to your point, split test.
Yeah.
But what I really love that you said, Ezana, is that you can also do other things in parallel to kind of really get a good mixture and insights to what is working by trying different times of the day, increasing the amount of leads that you put into that sequence or, cadence.
Yeah.
And it's testing. As SDRs, we're kind of like marketeers. We're trying to figure out, is the message resonating with the people that we're trying to reach out with? And the only way you're going to find that out is experimenting.
For sure.
But if you just put it out thinking, yes, this is the solid cadence that's going to win everything and get me all those meetings and leads, you got to try different approaches. And maybe like with me, when I'm running out of cadence, I may have 3 versions of that cadence that I may try with an industry, then try with a persona. So yeah, it's always good. And like, how do you, like you said, you watch and read a lot of things on LinkedIn. How do you get inspiration for your cadences? Because that's the one thing I'd love to know, where you're getting all these reply rates. Where do you get your inspiration from?
For sure. Honestly, I like to kind of take shots in the dark sometimes as well. I will I won't be a little bit like too shy about testing out new things that seem really interesting. Especially when I found them out through sort of one of these podcasts or something. Like Will Barron always has some really great guests on, and they always kind of like bring up these new and unique and kind of maybe a little bit not sort of the regular stuff that you'd expect, right? In terms of how you do your outreach, how you do your cold calls, etc. So I like testing them out, and the thing is, like I said, having that safety net, and then ensuring that you can try things that are a little bit more rogue, right? Things that are a little bit more out of, maybe out of kind of sales best practice, maybe sending gifts or something like that, right? Like people don't really do that, but it could work, right? So sending gifts and emails, that's something that's actually worked kind of well for me. It's kind of it's sending photos. One that I got, an idea that I got from someone else actually, was to send sort of like a photo as a dog barking up a tree, saying like, "Oh, am I barking up the wrong tree?"
Barking up the wrong tree, yeah.
Right. And it's little things like that that I quite like and enjoy testing out and putting into my cadences. I'll never kind of only solely rely on these new sort of techniques, but I think that, like, I read a statistic that SDRing is 6 times harder than it was pre-COVID, right? And
Oh, wow.
and yeah, for me, I mean, learning how to be an SDR in that atmosphere in the first place means that I know I have to get creative, right? I already don't have the same amount of experience, I'd say, as maybe someone that's been there for a year, etc. So I need to, bring something else out to try and combat that, right? And for me, these unconventional methods work very well. For LinkedIn voice notes, I think those are great. I think those are underused as well. You send someone, like pop one over to someone, they're probably gonna listen to it, and I think it's a great way to sort of like break the ice. Social selling, jokes. I think people are very, very uncomfortable with sometimes using humor because they think it's meant to be professional or whatever. But I've actually found that adding a little sprinkling of humor into my LinkedIn connection actually works wonders. And I've had people, connect with me and say, haha, that made me laugh, which is why I accepted your connection. And like, well done for making me laugh, or that brightened up my day a little bit. And I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of impression I want to make as a salesperson as well. I want to, make people a little bit happy that they're opening my emails and even enjoy. I have some of the most hilarious email conversations with prospects, right? Some of the most hilarious ones, and it's great because it builds that rapport, it builds that relationship, and at the same time, you get down to business as well. And yeah, so.
I love it. I love the creativity. And I was actually sitting there. There was a question that I want to kind of ask, because like at the beginning of like your journey and career as a brand ambassador, you're working with Tinder, which is kind of like a networking platform in itself, to like open that message for people to respond back. And I was thinking, does my man Ezana have any like Tinder tactics that he's using in his prospecting? But you're right, it's kind of like the gifts, the jokes, etc. And that's a creativity, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to like say on this show, like, do I use those sort of apps and stuff? But I can kind of understand. I was just wondering, does this guy use that? So I agree with you, dude. Like adding a bit of humor, adding a human element to your connections is kind of what makes you stand out, because people like me, people like you, and prospects and everybody out there get inundated with these messages. So I think just trying to add a bit of sunshine to somebody's day can really make a difference. And what's the worst that can happen? They can just say, not interested. And you know what? It did make me laugh. And yeah, with me, I use GIFs in my cadences as well. I think my breakup email is, the subject is, should I call the emergency services? And I say, okay, Ezana, you haven't got back to me. Could you just pick A, B, or C? And A is just like, Neil, you're a tenacious guy, but you know what? We're kind of cool with what we've got. Second one is, Neil, like, give me a call. I just forgot to get back to you. And then 3, it's a GIF of a guy shoveling snow in the Alps, and it says 3 is, I've been snowed under with so much work, please send coffee, and yes, send the emergency services, sorry I haven't got back to you, I'll get back to you later today. And that had the highest engagement out of all the cadences that I've built with teams. And what I've always found is that they've taken that template and they've moved it up to the cadence, more reactions and replies, and I'm like, dude, it's the breakup email, man. Like, save it.
You gotta leave it where it is.
Yeah, you got to do it. But do you know what? It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. I've had a lot of fun, and I can definitely feel that you've got big things going on. And I see recently that you've gone full time at Mintago with
Yeah,
your SDR role. So congratulations on that.
thank you very much.
And if you're welcome, dude. And for the listeners out there, if you were to give 3 bits of advice that you'd give to a younger version of yourself, or somebody even thinking of taking the internship like decision to go into SDR, what 3 bits of advice would you give them, Ezana?
Firstly, I would say that safety net, right? Always make sure that you have that safety net when you're prospecting, when you're trying out new things and split testing. Make sure that you're still backing your winners so that you're not kind of like, so you're never left in a bad place to meet your quotas. Second, I would say probably you want to keep learning always. And I think at times it can feel like taking time off to learn or do watch sort of like a 1 hour podcast or whatever can seem like time taken away from sales, especially if you're on a 12-hour learning grind. Always say try and at least get an hour in every day, even after your work day, just like an hour to really get in some new tips, some new things that you can integrate and share with your team as well. And third, be unconventional, be creative, and definitely try out different forms of messaging. Don't stick to the same sort of generic emails. Try the GIFs, try the videos, try the LinkedIn voice notes. You know what I mean? Try sending letters. I mean, you know what I mean? Like any
Yeah, yeah.
request, they're doing that whole thing now. Just be as creative as possible with your outbounding, because at the end of the day, you can have fun with it and really bring your own personality and color to the role.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's some solid advice, my man. And for the listeners out there, if they wanted to get in touch with you, because like you said, you're a person that likes to network,
Sure.
hopefully, and apart from the platforms such as Tinder, etc., what's the best channel to get in touch with you?
Definitely on LinkedIn. Just you guys can hit me up, send me a connection. I'll definitely accept because I'm all about the people. So yeah.
Love it. So I'll definitely put your details in the show notes for the podcast. So guys, if you want to get in touch with Ezana, definitely feel there's a lot of things that you can learn from a social selling point of view. This guy is highly active on LinkedIn. I'm always seeing him pop up on my feed and I love it. And Ezana, are there any shout outs that you'd like to give before we come to the end of the session today?
Yeah, I'll give a shout out to Will Koning at SaaS Leads. My guy Will. So glad to see everything that you're doing with the academy and all the great SDRs you're going to be, kind of creating and sending out to the world. So big shout out to you, my guy.
Thank you. So guys, Ezana Haddis, I really want to thank you for joining the show and imparting your knowledge. I can definitely see you coming back into the show in the future, and I'm really going to be watching you in the coming months to kind of see you grow in this SDR position. But again, thank you so much, Ezana. I wish you all the best success and happy selling, my man.
Happy selling, dude. Thank you. Great to be here. All right.